Hey friends, welcome to another installment of Strange Planet. Brian Tuohy has built his reputation on blowing the whistle on what he claims is the entertainment industrial complex behind professional sports. Among his most controversial statements, challenge deeply held beliefs about sports as fair competition. He argues that major sports leagues like the NFL, NBA, MLB, and the NHL are legally allowed to fix their own games because they're classified as entertainment businesses, not official contests of skill. And according to Brian, leagues can manipulate outcomes to serve financial interests, like the WWE scripts wrestling matches. He also contends that league executives have a vested interest in ensuring that the most profitable teams and players like Tom Brady or LeBron James advance further in the playoffs to maximize viewership, ad revenue, and merchandise sales. He details how referees can sway games without even appearing blatantly biased through foul calls, missed penalties, and controlling the flow of the game. He cites the infamous NBA betting scandal involving referee Tim Donaghy as the tip of the iceberg. And he has long warned that as leagues embrace sports betting, once taboo, they're entering a dangerous relationship with gambling entities. With real-time data sharing, micro bets, and algorithmic odds, he believes leagues are now capable of subtly manipulating in-game events to benefit insiders. He is, as I say, the ultimate whistleblower in the world of professional sports, and he is the author of the explosive books The Fix is In, Larceny Games, and The Fix is Still In. He spent over a decade uncovering what the sports industrial complex doesn't want you to know, that pro sports may be one of the greatest mass mind control operations of our time. Brian Tuohy, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it, Richard.
I have been a Toronto Maple Leafs fan my entire life.
I'm sorry.
And thank you for that. And like so many fans, I watch them every year claw their way into the playoffs, only to collapse in spectacular, almost scripted fashion. It's become a meme. Let me ask you straight. Is the fix in? Are teams like the Leafs kept competitive just long enough to milk ticket sales and TV ratings only to be engineered to lose when it really counts?
I think it's a very real possibility, yes. I think in terms of, and I forget how long it's been now since a Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup, for example. It goes back to
33
the
years. 33.
1990s, right?
Yeah.
With the Canadians. And so, where does the NHL probably think its money lies? Where does it need to expand into? I think it needed to expand into the southern United States to build fan bases because you have Canadians are going to watch hockey regardless. So you don't need those teams to be successful because fans are going to tune in, they're going to watch, they're going to go to the games no matter what because they're in a way addicted to hockey. But where fans are not that addicted or not that interested is in places like Dallas and Florida, in Las Vegas, in, Los Angeles. But ever since you traded Wayne Gretzky out of Edmonton to the LA Kings, suddenly, hockey has expanded across the southern United States and been extremely successful down there. It's amazing how many teams have transferred. Like the Nordiques couldn't win anything, yet they became the Colorado Avalanche, won the Stanley Cup. North Stars, or Minnesota North Stars, I'm sorry, became the Dallas Stars, suddenly won the Stanley Cup. Hartford Whalers suddenly became the Carolina Hurricanes, won the Stanley Cup. Now, is that just a bizarre coincidence, or is that the NHL orchestrating this to basically build fan bases, to build fans, and to make more money for everybody involved?
Whenever I talk about, let's say, plots or schemes or conspiracies, one of the critics will always say things like, well, there would have to be so many people in on that in order for it to be successful. Surely there would be a whistleblower. So how is it possible? Let's say, for example, the NHL, 32 teams, I believe, roughly, let's say, 20 skaters per team, coaching staff, scouts, the whole deal. How do they keep everyone on side with this, or do they?
Well, I don't think they need everybody. You don't need everybody. You don't need to be professional wrestling on that scale in terms of every wrestler, every referee, everybody's involved like they do in professional wrestling. I think in hockey, in the NFL, in other leagues, I think to a certain degree it's known. I think players do know that sometimes the referees will make certain calls to benefit certain teams, to benefit certain players, because it's going to help the league. It's going to help a certain game. It's going to push a 4 game playoff series to become a 5 or 6 game playoff series, which will make it more interesting, create more revenue, more ratings, and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I think it's known, but the problem is, what's a whistleblower going to do? If a player, if the greatest player out there, if you had Wayne Gretzky come out and say, you know what, the NHL's fixed. I know it's fixed. I was part of it. I laid down in certain games. I benefited from certain games. Everybody's going to line up against Wayne. Nobody's going to back him because the first thing they're going to say is, Wayne, where's your proof? Where's your evidence? And Wayne's going to be like, well, I don't have any because they didn't write anything down. They weren't stupid enough to send an email that said, oh, we're going to fix this game, or Wayne, we need you to lose that game. So there's going to be no evidence that he could produce besides his own good name. And is Wayne Gretzky or any other player, Mario Lemieux, whoever, are they going to sully their reputation? Are they going to sully what they've built up a legacy of and admit the truth about what's going on in the league? I don't think so. And I don't even think a smaller level player can do that, because here's the scary part. As I heard from a former NBA player who will remain nameless because you don't want to go on record, but essentially what he said is a lot of these players know exactly what's going on and know exactly what the referees are doing, but if they talk about it, if they do it even after they've left the game, there's clauses in our contract that say the league can pull, for example, their retirement benefits, that they can basically eliminate those things, eliminate their pensions, and therefore they get nothing back from the league ever again if they say the wrong thing against the league. And I mean, you can look at it today, players who are playing, they will say bad things about officiating, whatever, and they get fined for it. But it actually extends beyond their playing career, where if they bad talk the league, they can lose their pension. And if they lose their pension, for a lot of these guys, that's what they live on. And if they got nothing to live on, they're dead in the water.
So the truth, or the big lie, or the truth, however you want to look at it, then is protected by, in large measure, public incredulity.
Well, yeah, I think that's part of it. I think fans don't want to know the truth because when you think about it, you think about the NFL, you think about Major League Baseball, the NHL, the NBA, they're all multi-billion-dollar industries, right? I mean, the NFL, I forget what it is now. They make almost $20 billion a year in revenue. What $20 billion company do you trust? Can you name one? Do you trust Google? Do you trust Microsoft? Do you trust Exxon Oil? Do you trust
Right.
McDonald's? Which one do you trust? Yet somehow fans always trust the league. They always trust the NFL. They always trust the NHL. They always trust the NBA. Why? Based off of what? If every other multi-billion-dollar industry you think is lying to you, is not telling you the truth, and in a way is just out to get your money, why do you think these, sports leagues operate in a different fashion? Why do you trust them? Because they supposedly sell, their product based off integrity?
Hmm.
What integrity? Look at the drugs being used in the game. Look at all the cover-ups that have happened, the scandals, the athletes who are criminals, the coaches who are criminals, the guys who keep getting second, third, and fourth chances in these leagues. And you're gonna tell me that everything's legitimate at the same time? I don't know why you trust that. I don't. They've given you nothing to trust, so why would you trust them? I don't know.
Right. What would you say is the single most damaging piece of evidence you've uncovered that proves it's fixed?
Well, for me, which you mentioned earlier, was the revelation that there's no law, at least in the United States, that prevents the leagues from fixing their own games. And I think if you took something like McDonald's, and McDonald's had the ability to put an additive into their hamburger, for example, that would make their hamburger taste better every time you took a bite, and it was legal for McDonald's to do this, they would put it in their hamburger tomorrow because they know it's sell more hamburgers. Now, essentially, what we're seeing is by the fact that these leagues can legally manipulate, fix, control their own games, they can do this with their product. They can make games more exciting. They can keep you watching as a fan until the fourth quarter, until the 2 minute warning, until the final play of the game, time and time and time again, and do so perfectly legally. Why wouldn't the league do that? That's what they're there for. They don't put these games on for free for fun. They put these games on for a reason, and that's to make money. And I mean, I know for some owners it's just kind of a bragging right thing, but at the end of the day, they're there for a profit, and they're there to profit from fans. And the way you profit from fans is to keep them coming back time and time again. like P.T. Barnum, used to do back in the heydays of the circus. You got to give them a show, so let's give them a show, and I think that's what they do.
The NFL recently signed a multi-billion-dollar deal with sports betting companies, and yet
Yeah.
just a few years ago, they were publicly condemning gambling. Now, so is this a sign the league has abandoned all pretenses, or is it a deeper signal of collusion between the league and the betting industry, do you suppose?
Well, part of it is the league is finally being honest. That's one of the main things is, the NFL was the prime mover in the fight against legalized sports gambling. And then once that fell apart and they started legalizing sports gambling across the United States, then the NFL did a complete 180 and is trying to do everything it can to profit from that in any way they can that supposedly doesn't harm their integrity. They're literally turning their broadcasts into making everybody's living room a sports betting book, essentially. And the league doesn't care anymore because they're making money off it because a betting fan is an interested fan and they're going to watch games that they shouldn't watch because they got money riding on it, whether it's, a $10 bet, $1,000 bet, or even fantasy football. They know that's bringing eyes to the set. That's what they want. But I think, with the legalizing of sports gambling and the leagues, it is a real scary thing that they're getting in bed with, and I don't think they realize what they're in for. Because at a certain point in time, I think it's really going to blow up in their face, and it's not just going to be some player gets caught in some sort of gambling scandal. It's going to be more of a societal thing. And I think, when they legalize sports gambling, like in England, for example, the number of addicted gamblers skyrocketed. And I think that's something you're going to see in the United States where you see more and more stories of, especially young men for the most part, losing thousands of dollars, ruining lives because they have this addiction. And the leagues are going to have to own up to it at one point in time and say, we are part of the problem. I don't know if you can make them do that, but it's coming. That reckoning day is coming soon.
When you say that real-time data sharing and micro bets and algorithmic odds, this allows leagues to subtly manipulate in-game events to benefit insiders. Explain what all that means to me.
Well, I'm not sure it's necessarily the leagues, but it's the players or the referees that can do this. I mean, the leagues certainly can too, but for the player, for example, what they've seen around the world, especially like in soccer and in tennis and some other sports as well, is where there's so many in-game bets available now. Because back in the day when you had illegal bookies in the 60s and 70s, you could bet, who's going to win the game. Maybe you could bet against the point spread, maybe a couple other little, what they call prop bets. But for that, it was about it. Nowadays, because there's all this mobile online gambling with your phone and such, you can literally bet on like every pitch in a baseball game. You can bet on every point in a tennis match. You can bet on things like who's going to have the first yellow card in a soccer game, who's going to have the first corner kick and the first throw in, and blah, 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 blah. Well, what they've slowly learned is that athletes are no dummies, and an athlete can now influence these in game events, not affect the outcome of a game,
Right.
but they can affect the outcome of many, many bets. And they've especially seen it in tennis where it's really become blatant where a player won't be instructed to lose a match, but they may be instructed to lose like the second game of the second set. And so they tank that. Or maybe even just a couple of points in that set because you can bet on every serve essentially. And those sort of things are cropping up. And there are monitoring companies that are supposedly watching these things for not illegal bets, but for strange bets for things that fall out of the norm, and they've seen it in Europe and they've seen it enough times where people have been literally arrested and convicted of fixing these in-game events, and that's something that's coming. I'm sure it's happened in the United States, but it's going to blow up even more because everybody's got a phone, everybody can bet from their phone. You can do it in, what is it, 30 some odd states now. It's only a matter of time before somebody's cousin decides, hey, Bob, you're a player. I need some money. Why don't you do this little thing in the game? I can go bet on it. Nobody will know. Boom, boom, boom. And we make some money on the side. And those things are happening, I think, all over the place.
Let's talk about Super Bowl, was it 58? You've said in the past, marquee matchups are often engineered. I mean, how convenient was it that we got this script-worthy rematch between Mahomes and the 49ers with Taylor Swift headlines, driving global ratings.
right? Well, I mean, that's right there. That should have been a coincidence that people shouldn't have fallen for, right? I mean, the Chiefs that year were an average team for the first whatever it was 4 or 5 games, and then suddenly Taylor Swift starts dating Pet or Travis Kelsey, and then suddenly the Chiefs are winning, and suddenly Taylor Swift is featured on everything, and is Taylor going to be there? Is Taylor not going to be there? What's she wearing? You can bet on the color lipstick she's wearing. All this sort of craziness that was attached to it, and sure enough, the Chiefs ride it all the way, not just to the Super Bowl, but to the championship. And I mean, that's one of those coincidences that in my opinion, is not a coincidence. Again, you have a 10, $20 billion industry that could control these sorts of things that realize, oh my gosh, we're selling all these jerseys to Travis Kelsey because Taylor Swift's wearing it. That's Taylor Swift's boyfriend. And guess what? When you go to the NFL Pro Shop and buy a Travis Kelsey jersey, that money is split between all 32 teams equally. So the entire league is benefiting from you buying that Travis Kelsey jersey, not just the Chiefs, but every team's benefiting from that. And because the revenue is so shared, and they estimate anywhere from 80 to 85% of all NFL revenue is shared, everybody's making money on this sort of outcome.
Let's switch over to the NBA for a moment and talk about how referees, you say, are one of the easiest ways to influence outcomes. Was it Tim Donaghy? Was that his name? Tim Donaghy
Yeah.
in the NBA. What happened there?
Well, it depends who you ask. Now, Donaghy says he never fixed a game at all, never influenced the outcome of the game, didn't influence the point spread. He claims that when he was involved with these gamblers, he knew so much about the NBA, he was betting on basically his inside knowledge. A lot of people would disagree with that. Um, but Donnie is stuck to his story. He wasn't arrested and he wasn't convicted of fixing the game, but also that had been much harder to prove because they had him on these other gambling charges that were easy to prove that sent him to jail, that ended this whole scenario for both the FBA and the FBI. But Donnie, he was definitely, I think, influencing games because inside information only gets you so much. But the interesting thing is Donahue said, and again, a lot of people say, well, a convicted criminal, you can't believe him. But what Donahue said was the referees knew what the league wanted. The referees knew how to influence games based off the NBA's direction. And how the NBA would do this is, referees don't just show up at the game and referee the game and then go home. They have to watch game film. They have to, read the rule book. They have to do a lot of things in preparation for each and every game they're involved in. And he claimed that the NBA would send them certain messages basically in, if you need to focus on this play, you need to focus on this play. You don't need to focus on those plays. And through those directions, the referees understood what the league really wanted. And so, if they said, focus on this, focus on that, they would understand, well, that's going to influence this team's center. It's going to put him in foul trouble. It's going to change the way he plays his game. The NBA clearly doesn't want that team to win, but we're going to do our job because that's what our boss is telling us to do. So that's what they go out there and do. It would influence the outcome of a game, and there you have it. And they knew, the league wanted, if it's a 7 game series, a game 5, a game 6, even a game 7. And sometimes they would influence things in that fashion because that's what the league wanted. Sometimes they would do it blatantly. I mean, there's the famous 2002 Western Conference final between the Kings and the Lakers where everybody and their brother knows that game was influenced, basically fixed by the league and the officials to make sure that the Lakers won because they didn't want the Kings in the finals. They wanted the Lakers in the finals, and they did everything they could to get Kobe and Shaq in the finals as opposed to Chris Webber and Vlade Divac.
We're all familiar with the 1919 Chicago Black Sox. They called them the Black Sox because Shoeless Joe Jackson and others were apparently, paid to throw that game, and the Cincinnati Reds went on to win the World Series. Are there any other World Series outcomes that you think were fixed, didn't make the headlines the way the Black Sox? I mean, they got caught, but has it happened again?
Well, it's funny. I actually think the White Sox got the idea of fixing the 1919 World Series because the Cubs, they think, fixed the 1918 World Series, which many people don't know about and that's not get
No.
talked about much. But that's where they actually think the White Sox came up with the ideas. They saw their crosstown rivals do that exact thing, which is kind of amazing. But the interesting thing to me was, and I remember how I stumbled across this, but a guy by the name of, I think his name was Richard Hembolt. He worked for the Rand Corporation. And in 1968 or 69, he wrote a paper called "Has the World Series Been Fixed?"
Hmm.
And Humboldt was a mathematician, essentially, statistician, and he did all this research. And his claim back then was that, well, why would the Major League Baseball fix the World Series? Well, they do it because they sell more tickets, they get, more Game Sevens, blah blah blah. And his thought was, did the World Series go to Game Seven more often than it should have? And through his statistical analysis, his conclusion was yes, it had. So between like the beginning of the World Series, which was 1903, and again, whatever it was, 68, 69, he thought statistically it had reached Game 7 way more often than it should have. And if you continued onward after that into the 1980s, it was even more so. It was more outside the statistical norm that it went to, Game 7. And then after that, Major League Baseball started, putting on more playoff games. There became, the championship series, and then, the wild cards and all that. And the number of Game Sevens dropped because there was longer postseason. They didn't need to get everything back in a 7-game World Series. They had more playoff games to profit from. But it's interesting that a guy like that decided, and I actually talked to Richard, God, probably 5 years ago or something like that, and he said it just came to his mind. He did the research, and he wasn't exactly shocked at the outcome, but there it was. He thought it was statistically anomalous that the World Series kept going to Game 7.
So, given what you know, should we look at superstar athletes not as competitors, but as actors playing a role in a broader narrative? One managed by league executives or media conglomerates.
I think so. I mean, I think a lot of them even know that they're more than just a player. LeBron James, he's more than just the basketball player. I think there's a lot of athletes that are like that are more than just a regular athlete. I think, there was a famous TV commercial years ago where I think it was Charles Barkley said, I'm not a role model. But he kind of is. And I mean, I think a lot of these guys are just kind of actors on a bigger stage, but there's certain things you can't fake. You can't fake talent. Certain guys are just more talented athletes than others. But I think what happens when that talent arises is the leagues create bubbles around these players. And they do it through a lot of times through officiating. And so if you create, a bubble around Michael Jordan where you can't foul Michael Jordan or get close enough, who's the guy right now? Guy in Oklahoma City just won the MVP. SGA, I think is his initials.
Sorry, you're asking the wrong guy. I'm not
Yeah,
a
I know. I
basketball.
can't think of his name. It's just slipping my mind right now. But they were complaining that in game one that they just played against the Minnesota Timberwolves last night, he got something like 27 free throw attempts because if somebody just waved their hand near him, it was a foul. And that's what I think the league can do is the league can create these bubbles around players, really talented players, which can give them more room to operate, which showcases their talents, but it also affects the outcome of games. And if you have a player like that that you want to build up and get to a higher stage like this MVP, he's just named MVP today, then you're going to do that. And you have fans may complain and moan about it on Twitter or what have you, but if you get him into the finals, you get people watching. That's what matters at the end of the day. And again, a player like that, I don't think could be naive to the fact that it's happening. I mean, I don't think, maybe at first you might be like, well, I'm just that good. But after a while, I think Michael Jordan knew it for a long time that he was being given help, that he was allowed to do anything he wanted because he was the league. He was more important than a lot of the teams out there.
The NBA used to, I'm not sure if they still do, they used to have a rule that journalists or the media couldn't interview members of the losing team. I don't know if that's still around. I'm wondering if that was part of
No.
it. They didn't want them to say the wrong thing.
Well, the NBA was really insulated for a long time. David Stern really controlled that league. And I mean, it was amazing during his tenure as commissioner. You basically just had the Bulls, you had the Spurs, you had the Lakers, you had the Celtics, once in a while, maybe the Pistons or, Charles Barkley and Phoenix would show up. But I mean, it was, despite the fact that there was almost 30 teams in the league, only like 8 mattered. The rest were just also rans. But that's the way he wanted it because he recognized it as a giant television show. And the NBA and the NBC worked hand in hand to make that what it was. And I think that's never gone away. But it all still relies on that talent. You can't fake that talent, but you have to find it. And even though you've had some great hyped up, number one draft picks and whatever, they don't always pan out because they really aren't that talented. But when they find that talent, they will do everything they can to ensure that it makes the most impact for everybody involved.
So is the sports media in on the con? ESPN.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, they have. I mean, they have to be. I mean, just here, my own experience. So, not talking theoretical, I'll just talk about my own experience. When I wrote this book, Larceny Games, it was based on these FBI files, right? I actually wound up on an FBI watch list because I made too many Freedom of Information Act requests. So, the book was all based on FBI files. I didn't make anything up. I could just figure out who the athletes they were talking about through the files, doing a little research, what have you. And I found out that, the FBI had investigated NFL players, NFL Hall of Famers, NBA Hall of Famers, Major League Baseball players, college players, boxers, whatever, for gambling on games in which they participated. Either fixing games or just gambling. Guys who literally should be kicked out of the Hall of Fame were named by the FBI in these files. Nothing I made up, stuff I was the first person to uncover. So I wrote this book. And my publisher and I were contacted by ESPN, Yahoo Sports, HBO Sports, among others. 60 Minutes, producers from 60 Minutes called me and conversed with me a couple of times. Sports Illustrated was going to run an excerpt from my book in their magazine. I had all this stuff built up, and then none of them did anything ever. They just ignored it. They acted like the book didn't exist. My research didn't exist. They didn't say it was terrible. They didn't say it was great. They just acted like it never happened. And I just kind of vanished and went away. And I don't think it was a coordinated effort. I don't think, 60 Minutes talked to HBO Sports, talked to ESPN. But I think all of them recognize this is really dangerous stuff. It's really going to affect us, the sports media, and it's going to affect these sports leagues if we give this guy a platform from which to preach. So therefore, they maybe go away. And I think that was all intentional because they wanted to protect themselves. Because every media outlet, there's only 5, 6 media conglomerates like in the United States. They're all heavily, heavily invested in sports because sports is the only thing you have to watch live anymore. You don't have to watch anything else live. Everything else you can stream, watch it tomorrow, DVR, whatever. But sports, you really have to consume as it happens. And that's the only thing you can make sure that people are going to watch, make sure that advertisers are going to get their money back for. So all these networks are invested in whatever it is, the NBA, Formula One, soccer, hockey, whatever. But you have a guy like me out there saying, geez, all this stuff is orchestrated, all this stuff is being manipulated, you can't trust any of it. That's not good for business.
Is it just about business? Is it just about profit? Or is this maybe a psychological operation designed to pacify and distract?
Well, I think that's part of it. I mean, that's what the Romans used it for, right? And they had gladiator contests to basically entertain the masses while the Roman senators went out and did what they wanted to do. I find a lot of things that have happened recently kind of bizarre. Like, when COVID broke out and everybody had to stay home, for the first time ever, a team that was hosting the Super Bowl, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, wound up playing in that same Super Bowl. So in the year we all had to stay home, we had the first ever home Super Bowl. Kind of coincidental. You had a couple of times in recent memory where teams became like hashtag strong, like after the Boston Marathon bombing, Boston became Boston strong. And that same year, the Bruins went to the Stanley Cup Finals and the Red Sox won the World Series. You had hashtag Vegas strong after the shootings at the concert in Las Vegas. And that same year, the Vegas Golden Knights in their first year wound up going to the Stanley Cup Finals. So I mean, you've had weird coincidences like that. And again, are they really coincidences? I don't think so. I think it's too it's too wrapped up with a bow to think it just magically happened.
If it is a psychological operation, how do you think society would react if they found this out? I mean, why is it so important for the illusion to be maintained?
It's a good question because you look at professional wrestling, for example. People know it's a scripted entertainment sports thing. Not that those people aren't great athletes, the wrestlers who can do the flips and take the abuse they take. But I don't know if people would stop watching sports if they knew for a fact that it was fixed. I don't know if hockey fans would stop watching hockey. I don't know if baseball fans would stop watching baseball because the outcome is still unknown. Even if it is a fixed game, as a fan, as a watcher, you're not on the inside, so you don't know what's going to happen. So you still may tune in to watch because it's an escape for a lot of people. It really is. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that because everybody has certain escapes. They escape into movies, they escape into comic books, what have you. But at the same time, I mean, the degree of lying that's going on, I think, in professional sports is unprecedented in a way. And I think fans need to recognize what it is they're consuming because it will change things for them. I think if you take your fan hat off, look at it logically and go, geez, these things could be manipulated. Have I seen that sort of manipulation occurring in front of my own face? I think a lot of fans, if they're honest with themselves, would be like, yes, I have. And then maybe you'll take a step back and stop spending all the money on it, spending all your attention on it, and do things that are more important in life.
You've written about the use of performance enhancing drugs being quietly tolerated in certain situations. Do you believe leagues allow performance enhancing drugs when it benefits a storyline or a ratings boost?
Well, I think they allow it all over the place. I mean, I don't think it's just for that. I think they just allow it because they want those athletes out there to perform. And I mean, steroids, for example, aren't really about building muscles and becoming a big, strong player. It's more about recovery and quicker recovery times. So I think, they allow those things not openly, but I think behind the scenes they allow them because they want those star athletes to out there and they want them performing. I mean, the thing with, any league testing program is the league determines what are banned substances and what are not. The league determines when the tests take place. The league collects the samples. The league then tests the samples, and then the league supposedly tells us what the results of those are. So it's all completely league controlled. Now, how easy would it be for the league to hide those results? Incredibly easy.
Mm-hmm.
How easy would it be for the league to go up to an athlete and say, "Hey, Bob, you tested positive for cocaine, or you tested positive for steroids, or you tested positive for HGH, or whatever," and for the league to say, "Look, we can do one of two things here. We can out you as a steroid user, as a drug user, as whatever, and suspend you, or you play ball with us." How about next week? Maybe you underperform a little bit in that game that you're playing. How about you? How about that? Then we make this go away. I mean, how hard would that be to happen? I mean, it's blackmail, true, but is it outside the realm of what these leagues are capable of? No, because again, they control the testing programs completely.
The getting back to my Maple Leafs again, they always make it just far enough to build hope, and then crash in spectacular fashion. Game 7 is heartbreak part of the business model. I mean, is are Toronto fans' pain just too profitable to end?
Well, look at the Chicago Cubs. It took them over 100 years before they finally got a World Series. So, and they were the lovable losers, and fans would still fill the bleachers year after year to watch the Cubs fall apart year after year. I think that's part of it. I mean, I think that kind of lack of success, as well as dynasty teams, are great for sports. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people think dynasty teams are terrible, but they don't get it. I mean, like the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes or the Patriots and Tom Brady. People love them. Michael Jordan, the Bulls. They think back in the 80s, late 80s when Jordan was the thing. I remember reading that they thought 75% of NBA fans were Bulls fans,
Everybody
which is
loves a winner.
everybody loves Wimmer, but they also people hate them. So they'll tune in to watch them lose as much as they'll tune in to watch them win. And I think that's what's so great about, these dynasty teams is they create that tension on either side. People tune in to watch them lose because how many people wanted to see the Chiefs lose the Super Bowl because they hated Taylor Swift, you know? But and so they tuned in to watch. And people who loved Taylor Swift tuned in just to watch Taylor Swift and hoped her boyfriend won the Super Bowl because wouldn't that be great if he proposed to her on the 50-yard line after the game? But that's all part of it. And I think it's the same with losing. I think you, like you say, you build them up to that point and drop them down. And fans will still come back next year, build them up, drop them down. They'll come back. You just keep doing it as long as you can.
I'm trying to remember if I read this somewhere or maybe the last time we spoke, which was many years ago, you told me this, that the NFL has its own secret police force.
Yes, all the leagues do.
All the leagues do. What do
All
they
the leagues
do?
do.
What do they do?
That's a good question. I interviewed the former head of NFL security. It's called. His name was Warren. The guy at the in the is the late '70s, I think he was early '80s. His name was Warren Welsh. He was the head of NFL security. He was a former member of the FBI, and a lot of times they actually pull from the FBI, CIA, and other police forces actually to be in their security divisions. And I interviewed Warren Welsh twice for about an hour each time, and I still don't know what he did. He was able to talk in that real circular, obtuse way about his dealings, where I kind of got a clue of what they did, but not really understanding what they did. But these things exist, and what they're there for is basically to keep things quiet. I mean, part of it is game security, player security, that sort of thing. But if a player gets in trouble, they want like the NFL security to be the first one on the scene to fix the problem. And that's the same across the board. Major League Baseball, the same thing. I mean, I investigated a case which might have been one of the first fixed baseball games in forever a few years ago with a guy by the name of Lance Armstrong who wrote the book about Balco and Barry Bonds called Game of Shadows. He was the co-author of that book, and Lance worked for the Center for Investigative Reporting, and I teamed up with him because I got this tip that this gambler in Las Vegas was working with this Major League Baseball player, supposedly, to fix games. Well, Major League Baseball security got involved, and they were insane what they were able to do. So, what Major League Baseball did, which I don't, to make a long story short, is they basically got the Arizona, I think it was a sheriff's department, to literally hold the gambler's family at gunpoint during a traffic stop until they produced the gambler so Major League Baseball security could interview him.
Wow.
Now figure that out. How did Major League Baseball have that sort of power to be able to do something like that? Now, technically, if it was a fixed game, there is a law that prevents what they call the Sports Bribery Act from 1964. The Sports Bribery Act says you cannot bribe a player, coach, referee to alter the outcome of a game. Technically, this should have been under the purview of the FBI. Major League Baseball should have said, we think this game's being fixed. This gambler's working with this baseball player. Here's the evidence, FBI. You go investigate it. That never happened. In fact, I don't think they ever talked to the FBI. Major League Baseball did their own investigation. Again, somehow had the power to influence the sheriff department in Arizona to literally pull somebody over and hold them at gunpoint until they produced this guy who was involved. I
Unbelievable.
mean, it's insane they have that kind of power, but they do because they have those kind of connections and they build up those connections intentionally because of situations like this.
We've been focusing on team sports. I would imagine, well, boxing. I mean, there have been movies made about boxers, taking the fall. But I wanted to talk about specifically the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul fight, because I saw the training videos of Mike Tyson, and even though he's, approaching, I don't know, his late 50s, the speed in his hands and his footwork is still absolutely incredible. His punching power. We all saw the videos on social
Yeah.
media. When he got into that ring with Jake Paul, he barely threw a punch. I mean, I think it was pretty apparent that he was holding back. I mean, what do you think happened there?
I think that was part of the whole contract because I agree with you. I mean, looking at the training videos, like, holy cow, this guy looks like could be fighting professionally. I mean, it wasn't that long ago where we had the big old fat George Foreman literally win the heavyweight title somehow in his shape and condition, which those were fixed fights, but that's a different story. And yet now here we have Mike Tyson come out and, like you say, in the training videos, look like $1 million, and then fight like a kitten when he got into the ring. I don't know what happened there besides that there had to be some sort of deal, that there had to be something worked out that said you can't be doing this, can't be doing that. And I mean, again, it was an exhibition, so they're allowed to do that when you just call it an exhibition.
Right.
But boxing, like you said, the history of boxing is just littered with fixed fights. I mean, that's in fact the way they build up fighters. I mean,
Sure.
I interviewed a guy by the name of Charles Farrell who had managed 5 different world championship fighters during his managing career as a boxing manager, and he told me he himself had fixed hundreds of fights
Hmm.
because that's how you operate. Because if you have somebody with talent, and managers can recognize talent really quick in the fighting sports, you can't afford to have that guy go out fight after fight, get his head kicked in, even if he may win, because you just can't do that. So what you do is you work with another manager who has a couple of palookas and say, look, I need 3 or 4 rounds worth of work. Do you got a guy? Yeah, I got a guy. They set up a fight. The fighter gets his 3, 4 rounds. He gets a knockout, and then by the time he gets up to the title fight or the one just below it, you hear him announce, here's this guy who's got 22 fights. He's got 22 victories, 17 of them by knockouts. Well, chances are those 17 knockouts were all fixed fights. And that's how they build up the record. But it's been happening for literally hundreds of years in, boxing world.
Right. Not to belabor the point, but getting the Tyson Jake Paul fight. I mean, it was so obvious to so many people. Don't they? If they're going to fake it, I mean, it ought to be.
Make it convincing.
It better look convincing. Otherwise, they're going to lose their credibility. So why did they allow it to look so blatant?
Well, I think it was probably because it was one of the few times where you had both fighters in on it. Typically, when you fix a fight, you only have one fighter in on it. If you're building up, again, like say in my, example where you're building up like a champion, the manager would never tell his budding champion, oh, the fight you're going to fix in tomorrow night's fixed. You know what I mean? He would just say, hey, go out there and do your best. The guy who's going to lose on purpose, he knows it's fixed. He's going to take a dive. I think that's the thing with Jake Paul and Tyson is they both knew what they were doing. So it became kind of an orchestrated dance as opposed to looking like a real fight.
Are you I mean, how do you approach sports? Do you even bother watching a World Series? I mean, or are you too
No.
cynical to even root for a team?
Yeah, no, I can't. It's and part of it's because I'm getting older, I think, and I've lost interest. But after doing all this research, no, I just can't look at it the same way. Can I go to a baseball game and enjoy the day? Sure. Can I go to a hockey game? Can I go to watch a football game? Sure, I can do that, but I recognize it as entertainment. And I watch it with a different, perspective than a lot of other people will. A lot of people won't invite me over because I'll talk about these things, so I have to watch by myself. But, I just can't. Once you look at it with that type of perspective where you realize it's a business, it's an industry, they're out to make money, and they can control these things, and they do control these things. Once you recognize that and see it, you can't unsee it, and then it's not the same. It's like knowing how the magician does all his tricks. You can appreciate it, because you're like, wow, he really did that well, or look at his sleight of hand is great, but the magic's gone. It's just then the performance of that piece. And that's the way sports has become for me. It's just watching how they perform.
The Fix is in Larceny Games, and The Fix is still in. Brian, how do we get copies of these books?
You can go to my website, which is thefixesin.net, or you can get it from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever good books are sold. They should have it.
Fantastic. Brian, great catching up with you again. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on, Richard. I appreciate it.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.